Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending this author's talk. We're honored to welcome Joanne Cavanaugh Simpson and Brian Simpson, lecturers in the MA in Science Writing program at Johns Hopkins University. Joanne Cavanaugh Simpson is a senior lecturer at JHU AAP, the Advanced Academics Program, a nonfiction essayist, a freelance journalist, and a science and technology writer. She's a former staff writer at the Miami Herald and Johns Hopkins Magazine. She's a repeat recipient of a Pulitzer Center grant and a Pulitzer Center Fellow. In addition, she's a Pushcart Prize nominee. Joanne's work has appeared in the Washington Post, Scientific American, USA Today, The Sun, NPR, and others. She's covered stories from across Argentina, India, Nepal, China, and Cuba. Brian Simpson is editorial director at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health and editor-in-chief of the news website and daily newsletter Global Health Now and Hopkins Bloomberg Public Health Magazine. Brian's work has appeared in the Smithsonian, NPR, the Baltimore Sun, Johns Hopkins Magazine, and other publications. He's a faculty associate in the Department of Health Policy and Management and a lecturer in the advanced academic programs at Johns Hopkins. Tonight, Joanne and Brian will discuss their recent Pulitzer Center-supported reporting project examining Uganda's response to global health funding cuts in the wake of the slashes of the USAID and other funding sources. Through on-the-ground reporting, including interviews with dozens of Ugandan government officials, academic researchers, frontline health workers, and sex workers, they documented the ripple effects of funding reductions on Uganda's health system. They'll also discuss their experience working with the Pulitzer Center and offer practical insights into the grant writing process for freelance and staff journalists. Their project name is When the Money Goes Away, Saving Lives in Uganda and Beyond. I will include these links to that and the two articles that have been published, one on September 19th, 2025, and the most recent, This Hospice Has a Bold New Mission, Saving Lives, January 16th, 2026. We're grateful to have them here to help us understand both the human stakes of these AIDS cuts and the pathways to funding for your own projects. Please join me in welcoming Joanne Cavanaugh Simpson and Brian Simpson.
Well, thank you, Anne, for that lovely introduction. I'll go ahead and start us off. Anne summed up a lot of what we've done so far very well. And I'll begin our talk by sort of exploring how we got onto this story to begin with. As you know, there was a change in administration, and we, as journalists, wanted to look at basically what were the impacts of some of the decisions and big funding cuts that were made very early on. This was in January and February of last year. So we've been to different conferences, and we were trying to decide what could we delve into that would show the impact, especially outside the country. And one place that came up, Brian had background in Uganda, in particular, in context there. And we went to a conference in Atlanta that had a great deal of health research, public health researchers, diplomats, directors of programs, NGOs, you name it, all gathered together. It was a very somber event, but also a very hopeful event. And at that conference, Brian, would you like to pull up the quote? We started making contacts. We were also highly inspired by Elsie, president of Afri Health. We need to share our expertise and knowledge. We're in a global village. What happens in a small part of Africa escalates to other parts of the world. So this was sort of our guiding. Our guiding mission was to utilize this very generous grant money to go to Uganda and to be in the scene in order to find out more about what was going on from Ugandans themselves. We applied for the grant. I had had a grant before, as Anne described, and the grant process, which I can get into later with details, involved sort of focusing down on what our story was. And when you apply for a grant, you may have 200 words to describe your project, which takes a lot more than you think because you have to distill down what the focus of the story is, and it has to be a good pitch. If many of you who know how to do a pitch, that's what you're doing. You're pitching that to someone to fund your project. So we among the things they look for that are who has covered this before, what kind of stories are out there, how are you going to add to the body of knowledge, what's your key audience, where might it run, and that's all we had to pull together in that grant. And we can answer specific questions on that as well later. The other thing is that we had to do a budget, which we can also talk about, to say how much this would cost. The grant originally started to be out. Our proposal was larger, where it would have been in the US and in Uganda, but then we ended up narrowing it down based on logistics and publications to spending the 2+ weeks in Uganda this summer, and a great deal of reporting before and after as well. And I think the main element that I pulled from it, and it's something that we emphasize in the MA in Science Writing program, and something I'm working on this course I'm developing on advanced reporting, is that we talk about being, the need to be there, the need to talk to people in person, and to be in the scene if something happens. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Some of our challenges when we did the reporting, how we worked together as a team, and essentially how we got this accomplished. And I'll turn it over to Brian, because we decided to go to Uganda, and this was part of the world that he'd been in, and he can tell you a little bit about the background there.
Okay, thanks, Joanne. So I want to make sure we're all sort of aligned on Uganda. It is a country in East Africa, and it has a population of about 50 million. And to put that in context, in 2000, it had a population of 25 million. So it's doubled in size just in the last 25 years. And it is an incredibly dynamic country, a very young country. And it also has, a lot of challenges as well too, including there are 1.4 million Ugandans who have HIV, and that's a reality that has to be taken into account whenever we talk about the U.S. government cuts. So just to orient everybody too, I know 2025 for many of us was a long and tough year, but these cuts made by the new incoming administration early in 2025 have had a lot of impacts globally, as you can see, and then also in Uganda as well. And in Uganda, there were thousands of layoffs in the health sector as well. NIH and CDC research grants were terminated. So this was a huge sort of global story, and we also wanted to put kind of make it a human story as well. And so that's why, as Joanne was talking about, why it's so important to be there, the importance of being there. So as Joanne said, we worked our sources and contacts. I had been in Uganda in a long time ago in 2006, and still had some contacts there. We worked our contacts that we made at the conference as well. And we're always looking for, and this is something to think about too when you're starting on a big story, is talking to obviously as many people as you can, as many sources as you can, and also trying to find that super connector, somebody who is like totally plugged into the issue and who is happy to make more connections for you. And so we were fortunate enough to have a couple of these super connectors. One organized a dinner for us with some of the leading scientists and health researchers in Kampala, and that was like a very special time for us because we had a whole bunch of connections and sources in the room all at once, and they also had connections. So our sources were completely or very quickly sort of multiplying as well. And then one other thing too, of course, whenever you're doing an interview, one of your questions really should be, who else can I talk with? And we found in Uganda, especially, the sources were quite welcoming and very happy to connect us to other people. So it became like sort of an expanding sort of wave of connections of sources too. And so we we're based in Kampala, but we took a trip for a few days to east of Kampala, about 60 miles, to an area called Jinja, which is on the banks of the Nile River. And we met there. It was actually a really busy couple days of intense reporting. So we visited 8 sites in 2 days and talked to at least 20 people as well. And one of the people that we spoke with was Paul Mwanje, this gentleman here, and he's director of programs at St. Francis Health Services, and they do a lot of work on with sex workers, and have made a huge difference in a lot of lives, but also, as you'll see, have been quite challenged by the impacts of these cuts. And so so what has gone away with the money when the money stopped? They were no longer able to provide preventive HIV meds and diagnostics to 1,500 sex workers, and they were no longer able to deliver 9,000 condoms monthly to one brothel. And this is on the Trans-Africa Highway and going between Uganda and Kenya. And you can imagine, the impact of that in that one brothel. They also worked with 79 other brothels as well too. So you can imagine just that absence of condoms and what the connection, what happens there as well too. On that same trip, we also went to saw a nonprofit healthcare clinic on the banks of the Nile that was very well run, and makes a huge difference within that small area as well too. And we were constantly making sources and making connections with sources. And so I want to tell you this story about Hadija Lukowe. And you know, oftentimes when you're talking with somebody for the first time, it's not easy. And when there's a vast cultural gulf, it's even more difficult. And so we spoke with Hadija, and it wasn't an easy interview. But she saw, after a while, we kept talking, and she saw that we were genuinely interested in her. We showed absolute respect. We were polite, and we wanted to hear her story. And she warmed up and told us a very dramatic story where about 10 years before, she was HIV positive and was emaciated. She was not getting her HIV meds. It was too difficult for her. And this nonprofit actually sort of helped her with that. They got the meds for her. They helped her with some food, and her life turned around. And so now she's able to raise beans and potatoes and bananas in her small garden. And so this is a human story, and that's kind of like what we were after as well too. All right, and Joanne, back to you.
So you saw the photo of Paul, and that was taken at a brothel, outdoor brothel, something I hadn't recognized as a brothel initially, because it just was an outdoor scene instead of being in a home. And while we were there, we needed to be sensitive to sex work being illegal in Uganda. So Brian was doing an interview because he knows the public health background with the sex worker. And I was there. I photographed Paul. I photographed the scene. One thing you want to do is capture a scene and capture details that tell a story in the scene. And this is a place where the red soil is very predominant. And even though this is a doorway to one of the rooms that the women worked in, and they would still leave their sandals outside and made shoes outside. It's just a very human moment. And while Brian was doing the interviewing, I was also interviewing Paul, and I was interviewing the program coordinator, who talked about she knew that people would be dying because of the cuts. And that's a big part of working as a team, which we were able to do. And we can show you a little more of that later. And a lot of times when I worked at the newspapers, different newspapers, including the Herald, there would be a photographer and a reporter working together. And so sometimes the reporter wouldn't take photos at that time, but the photographer might ask a question or two. And we were actually using our phones, not full-on cameras, even though we've shot with SLRs before, partly because people are more used to phones, even though smartphones aren't predominant. It's just a softer way. And so here and then, so we were able to work together, which we'll talk more. And I do recommend that if you're doing a big project, if you have a chance to work with someone else, it's a really amazing opportunity. And so this was what we'll talk about extensive interviews in a little bit. But the other end of the spectrum are the officials. And the officials are sometimes difficult to get to get them to speak about things honestly. They're worried about how they're going to look. But we did this out of a need to be balance and fairness, because a lot of times people think, well, the minister, the health department leader may not, be getting things out fast enough. And then what does that mean? So we spent time making sure we were able to speak with officials as well as people who were affected. And in one place we went, Kampala Hospital. Oh, and this is the quote from the sex worker, which is very sad. Um, it just tells you what they're up against. And this was a young woman who had a 7-day work week, one of 130,000 sex workers, sends money home to her young children, her mother who's taking care of her son for school fees, and that is the human side. And then we would talk to the officials, as I said, who would try to show what they're doing to help. And sometimes that meant going into facilities that were either backed by the government or otherwise more official. And so if you can imagine walking into Johns Hopkins Hospital and saying, we're here doing interviews, how that could get a little conflicty or challenging. Well, we of course went in with the physicians who were showing their programs. We definitely weren't just walking in. So we had a guide who was taking us around. And then we also had permissions for any photos, or there were places where we couldn't take photos. But there was a director who came out and said, what are you doing here? And I actually have a funny photo, which we don't have, of the look on his face. And then all of the doctors who were looking up at him to see if he was going to kick us out, because, he wasn't quite sure what we were up to. But I told him we were focusing on this program, which we were, and sickle cell disease. And so you have to kind of put people at ease so that you can keep doing the work you're doing, at the same time be very respectful of privacy, et cetera. And so with that, I'm going to send it over to Brian to talk a little bit about talking to officials and what we learned there.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. It is a challenge talking with officials because officials tend to be officious. And so that can make it kind of challenging dealing with them and getting the truth, right? Getting to the truth. And sometimes they can be very helpful. Sometimes they can be very obstructive. Sometimes they can be both at the same time. And oftentimes they're happy to share data, or at least some data. And sometimes that can be almost overwhelming. They can almost share like too much data. You're taking in as much as you can. You're in a completely new environment. You're meeting this person for the first time. So there's a lot happening at once cognitively. And so oftentimes, I mean, you get all that you can when you're there, but you're going to want to go back and fact check all of that information, because there are so many times in our conversations, going back to fact check later, we understood, oh, there's like a little bit of a nuance here, or that was those data points weren't for the entire group, but a subset. And there's all these little levels there that you really have to be super careful with in dealing with officials. But it's also critical to get their perspective, right? You want to hear, and if you're doing a story on how how Uganda is being impacted by U.S. government cuts, you want to talk to some officials as for sure, and to include their perspective. And so we talked with Dr. Frederick Isabirie, and he's the city health officer for the city of Jinja, a city of about 280,000 people. And it was a super interesting interview because he was very candid about the fact that he had a staff of 350. And then, within, a very short amount of time of those cuts being announced, he had to cut 100 people. And he shared a little bit about like what that was like and how difficult it was. And people were calling him saying, I'm trying to like feed my children. I'm trying to support my mother and father, all of this. And so he had, did show a little bit of the human side as well. And then he talked about the challenges too, because one of the things that Uganda did almost immediately with the cuts was they said that, all of these HIV clinics that had been supported through PEPFAR, President's AIDS Emergency Initiative for AIDS Relief, that they were going to be closing all of those clinics. And so those people who would get their medications at those clinics were now going to be, the Ministry of Health said, now you're going to be integrated into the health system. So suddenly he's lost 100 staff members, and now he's going to have to like really quickly ramp up a whole program for HIV care. And so he was really interesting because there were times during the interview where he was like wildly optimistic, and he would say, "Oh, it will be no problem. It will be no problem." And then there were other times when that maybe somewhat of a facade sort of like dropped a little bit, and he would be kind of a little bit more resigned to the reality. And so I think that this quote that represents that duality really pretty well there for sure. But he did give us a kind of like a take on like, his perspective of what's happening. And so talking, you can't escape talking with the officials. And Joanne, I'll send it back to you now.
And out of balance and fairness, you want to do so. This is very important. People are saying, "Well, there can be no objectivity in journalism anymore," and I don't believe that's true. I think there can be fairness, and that means you're not just saying he said, she said, or he said, or whatever. You're trying to get to the truth. You're trying to find out deeply, like what are the challenges, what's really going on. And I did want to say one thing. We did probably interview about, and I'm well over 40 people, or talked to 40 or 50 people this 2 weeks. And it seemed like we spent good time with a lot of them too. So I don't know how we did that. I do know that at one point, Brian was in an interview, and he's starting to get a little tired. And this is where Otter AI really comes into play. So one just small item is that we recorded, and we always got permission, and we did it with the Otter AI app, because this is what you can put on your phone, not just on your Zoom. And because then we could get those data points that we can go back and check later, because there's only so much you can take in. So that was just a technical thing to bring in. And speaking of technical, the one other element we did, which was unique, I think, for people covering these stories, is we looked at how technology was being used to help the health system in Uganda and to react in some way to the cuts. And there were two particular programs. One, and it was like, how do you bring life to the technical side of this? And this was Dr. Kasyaba, who they had created an app, smart triage, that would allow, using the Android phones, that would basically flag children who are high risk for sepsis, which is a huge killer, 20% of deaths worldwide. And this is where we couldn't go to the hospital because of our timing to see it in action, because it had little lights that lit up, and so I had to have Dr. Kassab explain it to me. Okay, take me through this. You go into the child comes in, and then what happens, and then what does the doctor do, and so that I could explain it. And Brian, if you wanted to show his quote about what typically has happened, is that there wasn't a lot of triage in areas that don't have the support. So this was, even through all the technical, you can get this very moving quote. And another aspect of what we did was we went to Brian learned about a a local pharmaceutical company that was that even some of our Ugandan friends and contacts didn't know was producing ARVs, and those are antiretroviral medications for HIV. And so one of our initial contacts, one of Brian's original contacts, a top dean at the public health school there, he was one of our main little points of departure for other, our connector. And
Super connector.
super connector, thank you. And one of his former students was a communications director at this plant that we went to. So that's, when you get lucky. And it was an amazing experience. We got access to the plant, we got a tour, an interview with the director. But this is also like now we're in a corporation, right? We're in a, I mean, I guess they're pretty much business. And so they don't want you to take certain photos, proprietary information. So we're trying to respect that, make sure we respect that. But going through and shooting, I shot, a lot of photos. I found the place completely fascinating. And even so, and we were going to made sure we fact checked everything. In this case, we double checked that this photo was not going to show any problems. But as a journalist, I'm also like, I've gotten access to something very few people probably have access to, especially as a journalist. So I'm downloading the photos onto my WhatsApp app just in case they want to see my phone and check the photos. And, it's just an instinct. So I've had like 300 photos downloading while Brian's interviewing. So that's just a little inside element of that. But we were very impressed with what they were doing and what the challenges they're up against. And, could they come up with enough medications? Well, only if the government had money for it. So it wasn't like it was all, promotional. It was like, what are the real challenges here? So Brian, I want to pop that over to, actually, I'm going to switch from technical to human along these lines. The other element we wanted to talk about is sensitive scenarios. And that is these next few photos are photos that I took, and we'll stay with Deborah and her family for right now. This is Deborah who is battling cervical cancer, and her children, and they sat down to speak with us. And this is a sensitive subject. These are children who know that their mother's sick, and so you're trying to ask questions carefully, and the mother's responding, and the kids are there, and it's a very moving experience. And we felt very honored that Deborah would speak with us. And one thing that I think brings home that this is a story about people, stories about people, is to ask open-ended questions. Of course, ask questions about the children. So I asked what was her son, what was his favorite sport, or what was his, and he loved soccer, and his favorite team was Real Madrid. And the daughter, she had a favorite song, and it's called Lucusita, and it's by Stream of Life Choir. And so she was listening to this song. This didn't make it into the story, which is one reason I'm telling you, because some of these details, I mean, we got details about, what they brought, what the workers brought, the 2 kilos of rice, the 3 kilos of beans, a bar of soap. That made it in the story. But what I would like to have had was later I had the health worker show me what is the song she's listening to on the phone. And I went and listened to it later. And it was a phone with lyrics on loss and faith. He said that she finds solace with this song. And one of the lyrics is, pain is at times too much for my heart to bear. I break and stumble. And this is a 5-year-old, girl. And so they're very moving moments here. And if you can show the next visuals as well. She also still seems to have, this made it into the story. Actually, there was something more about this in the story that when she does pass away, she probably will, because she is stage 4 at some point, although she's pretty amazing. She wants to make sure her children, her daughters especially, are going to school, because it is very challenging, more challenging for young girls and women and teens with health and et cetera in Uganda and many other countries. So the next couple photos too are, this is when we're on site. This is one of our directors of a program and physician. She's taking us around, and while we're going around, we're I'm shooting the photos, Brian's interviewing, and so I start to do some interviews in another location, and I'm getting photos of some of the moms. This is a sickle cell clinic, so these children have sickle cell disease, and this is a photo that I'm things started to happen. So I'd already shot an image of like a portrait of this mom with her children, and she had started to cry because she brought her son in. Um, he was in a lot of pain, and she was alone, and she wanted to reach out. And this is the doctor consoling her. And I have the photos. I took some of her crying, but I'm not using those photos out of respect for her. But this is a beautiful photo and a strong moment. And she showed me her son's hand was swollen, and these detail shots, I think, really bring home the human impact of why funding is needed for these programs that can save lives and keep people out of pain. And Brian, what's the next slide? I'm just thinking. Yeah, we're going to shift over to challenges and solutions. As you can see, um, the the human side of what's going on, and the brave leaders who are making it happen. And Brian, I'm going to switch it over to you.
Sure. Thank you. One of the things that really struck us, and our stories reflect this, is that early on in 2025, when these cuts were announced, there was sort of a rush by the media to go to places like the places that we were going to in Africa, and seeing what was happening. And absolutely there were some terrible things happening in terms of the impacts of the cuts. Um, and but we went in July, a few months later. The shock of the cuts was starting to dissipate. Um, but we also saw sort of another facet of the reality, and that was uh, an incredibly determined, incredibly smart people who are working on solutions, and that's really what struck us and kind of pushed us in a way into solutions journalism, and finding how people are innovating and making and differences in what they're doing. So there's no doubt that the impacts of these cuts will continue. In a lot of ways, they're yet to be realized. And there are plenty of challenges, within Uganda as well too. But we also, realized too and learned that there are some other kind of key factors there that donor countries do not determine the health of a country like Uganda, and that there are sort of so many innovations that aren't recognized, that are happening, and so we'll I just want to maybe we'll close like with one example. This is Sylvia Nakame, who is executive director of Rays of Hope Hospice in Jinja, and she had been there a long time. The hospice had been around for like 20 years, and they were kind of like becoming broken by having seeing so much death. And they would say, she said the only at the time the only exit was the only exit was death, for their patients. And they looked at their data and found that 60% of the women, the cases that were coming in, were either for breast cancer or cervical cancer, and they decided to do something about that. So this kind of shows sort of that the incredible change of mindset, where they are a hospice, where their responsibility is to like ease the pain of dying, and they getting into treatment and prevention, because they knew that early treatment against cervical cancer or breast cancer can be successful. And so they've also sort of helped getting HPV vaccinations, which prevents cervical cancer as well too. And so that kind of innovation is happening, and we thought should be recognized and included in the stories too. We had one researcher tell us that that the health system in Uganda does so much with so little that every day nurses and doctors are wringing tons of water out of rocks. And that was a kind of an image that stayed with us. And I just want to close with this quote by Dr. Rhoda Wanyenze, Dean of the McCary School of Public Health. And that sort of set kind of a tone for us as we were doing some of our interviews. So with that, we'll say thank you, and I think you can move on to questions now.
And if you're still thinking of questions, there are a couple things that we can talk about reporting wise. So, and if you have a question or
Well,
any,
yes, I'm encouraging everyone, please. There's so much here there's so much unfinished business that there must be questions. So I'll start off. I was touched by Deborah's kids, of course. The human aspect, the human focus of this whole story. At present, they're lucky. They have Deborah. Did you encounter the children who had lost the parents? And is it a possible next step to do a story on what happens to those kids? Say they
well,
have no grandmother to take care of them.
yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because, well, Deborah didn't really have a lot of family support, but we were told that if she passes away, family will emerge and take the children in. But at the time, I guess everyone's just struggling already to survive. One of our strong researchers and leaders, Dr. Eureka, he basically maternal orphans are a very high number in Africa. And he pointed out that, and this is another quote. See, I can share some of these things that didn't make it in the story, cut by editors for space and et cetera.
Editors.
He's one. He's one. The mother is your safety net, is your connection to safety, is your connection to food, is your connection to education. And so we did not. We encountered a lot of mothers who were single mothers for whatever reason, and so we did not follow up. We did not do a specific story on that, but that is a very strong story. The plight of orphans in many countries, and which will be exacerbated by lack of funding because of deaths from malaria and HIV and all the things that are not currently public health efforts that are being cut and have been cut.
Yeah, I would just add that, I guess tragically that, that the uh, orphans and the challenge of orphans is nothing new since the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. That so many children have lost their one parent or both parents, and the idea of returning in any way to that going backwards into that situation is haunting.
Okay, thank you. I have a question from Lisa Polos. Hello, Lisa. She's a fellow classmate right now. Was language a barrier and make it harder to interpret your data?
I'll take that one, Joanne. Yeah, so Uganda is largely an English-speaking country. However, I don't know the number of languages spoken there, but I think it's at least the dozens, scores, maybe
Oh
hundreds
no,
of languages.
it's like almost 50.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
there's a huge number of languages spoken there. For the most part, we were able to speak in English, and there were times when we did have relied on sort of people there to translate for us. So yeah, so it's a challenge, but one of the reasons that we chose Uganda is that we would have that access to the language.
And one thing
Okay.
that Brian was good at doing is when we did have a translator, he would encourage the translator to not say she says, but to use I. So she's translating, and so the quote is really just more, more not just more accurate, but easier to follow to translate what she said, not in the third person. So I thought that was a really good tip too.
It's not like everybody is a trained translator at all, but we found that usually like when people do translate for us, if you don't give that instruction, yeah, they'll be doing third person, he said, she said, blah blah blah. And then they're like going into more summarization of what they're saying and not what they're actually saying. So yeah, so that first person trick will hopefully get you closer to what they're actually saying, and so you have a quote.
Okay. I have another one from Nada Fadul, another classmate. Hello, Nada. She asks, what additional ethical considerations come into play when interviewing vulnerable populations in a politically and economically precarious context?
I think there actually are resources on this about ethical reporting. In the course I'm teaching, we're going to be talking about that ethical, sensitive reporting, trauma-informed reporting, reporting in poverty areas of poverty. There are guidelines with this. Um, it's about respect, and yes, we are coming in from outside. We work mostly with Ugandan, almost entirely with Ugandan health leaders to do our work. So we were not coming in with. We came in with an open mind. That was one thing I wanted to say at the beginning. We had a hypothesis that everything would be, that the shocks would be terrible and the impacts would be terrible. But we were already seeing signs of adaptations. And when we arrived, a lot of people told us we didn't expect, this to have aid the whole time. It was the shock of it. So they say we understand that American taxpayers might not want to, spend money on this. So we kept our minds open to actual perspectives that were not ours. Always, I do that in all my work, and we were careful to listen closely, to treat people with respect, to not show them at maybe their most vulnerable moments, as I mentioned with the mom crying. No woman wants to have a picture of herself crying. I mean, this is like human, right? And just make sure we got permissions, make sure they knew exactly what we were doing. And so there are guidelines for this, and we try to practice them in every way that we could.
I was going to add too, on the sort of the ethical considerations of interviewing. So in some follow-on interviews that I've done since we've gotten back, one researcher in the U.S. was very concerned about what would be included, was worried about how he or one of his colleagues may have phrased things, and concern about sort of it getting to the government, to the U.S. government. And so that's kind of a different situation where we are now, where some scientists have that concern.
Oh,
I see.
absolutely. We had scientists that later became worried about maybe visas, and we didn't necessarily use those interviews, even though we had done them. We still gained perspective on the whole background, the scene, but we were very careful about that. We didn't run anything that people didn't know was going. There were no surprises. We fact checked every last thing possible multiple times. So there were no story ran where someone said, "Oh, I didn't say that." Well, I've never had that happen, but I didn't want that in there because they would know. They knew exactly what was happening. So that was another part of ethics, I believe.
Wonderful. Okay, I have Brittany asking, was it difficult to make people want to talk and interview with you? And you spoke of that. And how did you reassure people or make them more comfortable? And she had another question, and I'm not seeing it quite here. So, yes, how do you get them to warm up and drop their guard? And she
That
had another question. I've lost it. I'm sorry. Okay.
that's actually a very good question, and done a lot of reporting over time at various publications, and I think you people sometimes don't know how to tell their stories. Brian mentioned that. And so you have to ask enough questions. And one thing that was a really great narrative reporter once told me, and it wasn't Lane, although she has all the best tips ever for empathetic reporting, Lane DeGregory. But she said she would ask questions, but someone would tell her about something, and she said, "Well, can you tell me more about that? What more can you tell me about that?" And how did that, not the TV reporter, how did that make you feel, but what was your reaction? And so you follow up with these questions. You try to get details too, that people don't know that you need details to paint the picture. So when you're asking questions like, well, you know, when we were leaving, speaking with Deborah, the care worker that was there with us, and she didn't have a problem giving this, but I wanted to know what they bought, a package of items to Deborah and her family. So that's how I got the 2 kilos of this. And I wrote it down as she was telling me exactly what they brought. Those details bring things to life. So you're on the one hand, you're getting people to speak with you about their world and share, and you show respect and you say, I'm honored that you're speaking with me. You're showing me so much about this experience, and you believe it. You're not just, you're not just trying to get the quote, you're really trying to understand. And then also trying to pull out those details. Well, how old were you then? And where were you living? And what was it like? And so if you're going to do really strong reportage and scene building, you need to get those details as well. And so that's a big part and just making people feel comfortable. Sometimes we didn't have the opportunity to do this much, but you go back more than once, right? And people show that you're dedicated. I think they knew we were dedicated because we came so far to be there, so that probably helped. But it's also about the guides. We were introduced to people receiving care by the people who were running the programs, who they had a relationship, and so they could introduce us. So there was already a bit of trust in that, and we weren't going to deceive anybody in that paradigm. So it wasn't like we walked up and said, "Hey, patient, tell me." So that is another way. You have to have the guides that bring you into the community that you're not a part of, in order to make people feel comfortable and know that you're not a danger per se, that you have this
And
connection.
that's an old, truth of all humanity. There are places in the hills of Tennessee, if you don't know somebody to take you up the holler, you don't go. You're not welcome until they know you're safe. So that's understandable. Um, Ann Palmer has a question. I had the same. In the absence of this funding, she asks, do you hear about any efforts to fill the gaps left by the withdrawal, the USAID's withdrawal, private sector foundations? I think you touched on that in the article, that there are private donations. Where's this coming from? Are their intentions good? Are they trying to capitalize on a bad situation?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think like what people in public health will tell you is like there's no way to fill the gap that to fill up the what was lost from the U.S. government funding, and other countries too, the UK, Netherlands, France, Germany. Everybody has sort of stepped back on their global health funding, so those amounts are not going to be filled up by any billionaire even. That's not going to happen. But I think what the things that we saw were, yes, some of these small NGOs are able to make a difference in their area, and are sustained by funding from within the country, but also a lot from outside, so from private donors and foundations in other countries. So on a small scale level, like we saw with Rays of Hope and other ways we saw like, yeah, they're making can make a big difference in a small area. too. And I think that governments also have responded by increasing their health budgets, knowing that that's going to be essential. And we've seen, I think, places like South Africa where some actual additional taxes have been levied to pay for healthcare and sort of health situations there too. So different solutions out there, but I think it's not there's not like a silver bullet out there anywhere.
And there are more private donations, and the U.S. is not the only country cutting. Canada actually stepped up with more funding, but the UK, I believe Netherlands, Germany too, or France have also cut back. So, and that's part of the story. It's, not just the U.S. And I did see one question I went at. Did anyone react to you negatively as Americans? How did you separate yourselves from your government? um, they no, people did not react to us negatively. We were very welcomed. I think most people knew. Like I just met someone in a little bodega, and she's like, "Do you hate him?" I was like, I mean, we had a nice uh, a moment there where we agreed. But in general, that did not come up. They've lived with difficult political situations, so they basically gave us some tips. You know what I mean? It was not aimed at us at all, and I think that was helpful. We didn't know whether that would be the case, frankly, and it wasn't. So, um, a couple more questions in there, I think.
Okay, I got one from Melissa. She says, "Hi, Brian and Joanne. Thank you for this excellent talk. You had a terrific outlet for your reporting in NPR. But is there a robust market for global health stories? Aside from NPR and the fantastic Global Health Now, do you have any recommendations for outlets for these important stories?"
Well,
That's a challenge.
um, it's a challenging environment currently, and the Guardian is a good example. We had interest from the Guardian, but the sickle cell story wasn't one that took root there. We had interest from another medical journal, but it didn't end up taking root there. I think there are definitely publications for this. If you're writing about women, More to Her Story is a wonderful publication. Of course, there's the New York Times if you're affiliated with it, or the Washington Post. But the freelance market right now is very challenging, and Global Health Now is excellent. Brian is the editor, so that's why Melissa was saying that.
Thank you
Uh,
for the plug.
it is a kind of a challenging time to write about, and frankly, getting grants and funding is a really helpful way to do these stories. You do have to have venues to publish in, but if they're not, paying for the travel or expenses, you have a better shot. And they have other grant areas that are up our alley in terms of science writing, the rainforest reporting grants, ocean and fisheries, climate and labor. There's global health, AI, which I also worked with, local reporting. If you work for a small publication, they love supporting small publication work. So it doesn't have to be international or national. They really wanted something in the Baltimore Banner. And we talked a little bit about that, but there really wasn't a U.S. angle. And actually, the Banner was interested. So, in the end, at first they weren't sure what to do, and et cetera. So, when we moved on, but there are places for this, all this kind of work, and the grant area is one to help get funded. But you do need to look for, when you apply, they want to know that you have possible publication or publication even commitments. There are fellowships though at the Pulitzer Center and other places that don't require that. So if you're a student, you can be a student fellow, or you can do fellowships in the AI Accountability Network, which I advised. That you don't have to have publications lined up. You just become part of that. But you have to pitch a good story, not just a topic. You have to pitch some kind of, really edgy, hasn't been reported on, is going to capture people's attention story. Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing I would add was that one other publication to look at is called Think Global Health. It's
Mhm.
published by the Council on Foreign Relations. Excellent, excellent publication, and they do publish journalism. They do a lot of commentaries, but they do publish journalism as well too. So there's another outlet for you. And yeah, we tried even pitching one story that had a very much a local angle in Texas, and just couldn't get any response from the major metro paper there. So yeah, it's a tough market out there in a lot of ways. I live and breathe global health, so I think all these stories are fascinating and have the opportunity to publish a lot of articles on global health issues. So I'm always like, what? This is a great story. I don't understand. Why aren't they snapping this up? But yeah, it can be a tough market out there for sure.
And with that thought, even with the stories you do have, and we had an editor who was interested in our work, the second story on the hospice who does end of life care, doing prevention, which is a paradox, right? That's usually one of your elements of a story. um, he said, well, we don't want to focus on just one NGO because you can imagine they can't feature a single NGO all the time. So then I'm out there trying to figure out, is this a wider trend, and doing like hundreds of hours, it felt like probably was, of additional reporting when we got back to see if other hospices or palliative care organizations were also doing prevention, and found them and found studies, but it took a while. And then that he's like convinced, okay, now you got a story. So even when you have the story, you have to still sometimes meet the editor in a new place. um and even then he still like played up the one hospice at the end. It's the bigger picture's in there, but he was starting to cut that stuff. So you never know, editors, right? But
I'll make a confession here as a editor, and I've been editing for 25 years or so. And when we got into the writing phase, I was like, oh my gosh, writing is so hard because I'm used to sitting back as an editor and going, fix this, change that. Hey, what's this mean? Blah, 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 all these questions. And then being on the receiving end of that, that was an education. I was like, oh man, I should be nicer as an editor.
I think that's true. And we did work well as a team. I saw that question. I just wanted to say the reporting part, both Brian and I have reported out of the country, and we've worked together on the scene, especially. It's amazing, amazing process. And that's a great thing if you can do it. There are challenges, but it was a great experience.
Yeah, I was just going to say you can't underestimate the intensity of reporting in the field in a situation like that. And there's like so much happening around and so many people around. And so it was fantastic for Joanne to be doing an interview over here, and I'm doing an interview over here. Sometimes I was doing like sort of like supposed to be the main interview, but Joanne found a better story through her interviewing too. So it's great. That teamwork is pretty special.
Yep. And it all comes together in the end.
Well, thank you both for coming here and sharing your story and your project, and the wisdom of how others can follow in your footsteps at the Pulitzer Center. And I think you've been a great hit. And who knows, this is the spark that you could have lit, and you're the next Mother Teresa of taking care of the unfortunates that are at risk. So thank you very much. Thank everyone for coming. And I think we're going to wrap it up.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.